Here is chapter 1 of your story. Chapter 1 I moved into the quiet cul-de-sac of Maplewood Ridge on a calm September afternoon, full of optimism and pride. The house was modest but solid, the kind of place you imagine raising a family or simply enjoying a few years of peace. I adored the front yard. A neat lawn, a small garden bed by the driveway, and a mailbox that stood at the end of the concrete strip where the mail carrier would stop each morning. That mailbox had a little character. Ribbed metal with a rounded top, painted a deep forest green, a small brass plate with the house number. It looked fine to me, and as far as I knew, it looked fine to everyone else too. The neighborhood was governed by the local Homeowners Association, the Maplewood Ridge Homeowners Association, or the HOA as people often whispered. I'd heard the rumors. A board with rules, compliance forms, occasional fees, and complaints about colors and fences and who parked where. I accepted that as part of the package. After all, the neighborhood looked tidy, the roads were clean, the property values seemed stable. But I didn't expect that my little mailbox would soon become the epicenter of a spectacle. It started innocuously enough. A letter slid under my front door one evening, sealed in white envelope with the HOA logo. The subject, Violation Notice, Mailbox Non-Compliance. I picked it up, browsed the text. Your mailbox does not conform to the community standard as adopted by the board on June 15, 2022. To avoid daily fines, you must replace or modify your mailbox to the approved specification by October 1st. I read it again. My mailbox, non compliant. I glanced out at the box at the curb, pristine, freshly painted. What standard? There was an attachment with a tiny photo of the approved model. Slender black steel, square post, and a box with a curved flap, quite different from mine. I fumed. I flipped further. Reference to Community Standard 7.4b, and failure to act shall result in a fine of $50 per day, starting October 2nd. My heart sank. I tried to call the HOA management office. The recorded voice asked me to submit an architectural review form, pay the fee, wait up to 30 days for approval. I asked if the adopted model had been posted publicly, whether the board had sent out notice to all residents. The voice said I'd have to check the website. I logged into the HOA portal and found the CC and RS, covenants, conditions and restrictions, and amendments. There was mention of mail receptacles must match design and color approved by board, but no specific model or photo, nothing about black steel square post. I forwarded an email to the board. I asked for clarity. When was the change adopted? Why had I never been notified? No reply. September turned into October. I received another letter. Last warning. October 2nd came and went. No changes from me yet. On October 5th, I received a fine notice, $150. Then $200. Then $250. It was escalating. I realized the box wasn't just about the mailbox anymore. It was about power, compliance, black and white rules, threats of fees. I wasn't alone. Across the street, I heard whispers from other residents, some who had already replaced their box, annoyed at the cost and timing. Some were angry. Some were clearly intimidated. I chatted with my neighbor Mrs. Green, an older lady, whose new mailbox had arrived last week. She complained quietly, "They didn't give me any real choice. Just the model and the installer they recommended." The board had apparently partnered with a contractor. Many houses already had the approved version in place. Mine stood conspicuously different. Then one Saturday morning I awoke to notice a small orange sticker on my mailbox post. Violation, non-compliant mailbox. Remove or replace immediately. Further fines will apply. Felt absurd. The box wasn't broken, wasn't unsafe, wasn't causing any harm. The mail carrier used it fine. I asked myself, why this? Why now? Why the push to force this box out? That question gnawed at me. I dug in. I looked at old Street View images. Years ago, my mailbox looked exactly like countless others in the neighborhood, including those who had not yet been fined. I pulled up meeting minutes of the HOA board. Sure enough, the June 15, 2022 meeting minutes listed a motion to adopt standardized mailbox units for uniformity across community, but gave no indication of homeowner input, no survey, no vote listed. I found commentary online of other HOA horror stories. Mailboxes mandated, fines imposed, homeowners forced to spend hundreds or thousands to comply. Example: one couple in Maryland fighting their HOA over a $500 mailbox mandate for years. George Weigel? 1. That gave me perspective. This wasn't just me. It was a pattern I decided to push back. I emailed the board asking for a hearing for an exception, noting that my mailbox pre-existed the rule, that no harm was being caused, and that the fines seemed arbitrary. The email bounced back. No reply. Another letter arrived. Your account is delinquent. Unpaid fines total $450. Unless payment is received within 10 days, a lien may be placed on your property. My pulse raced. A lien on my house because of a mailbox? I filed the appeal form anyway, paid the appeal fee $50, and kept the box as it was. I notified other neighbors. Did they also receive a notice? Some yes, some no. I started posting on the neighborhood Facebook group. Anyone else hit with the mailbox violation? A few chimed in. A couple said they felt powerless. One said his mailbox was painted wrong shade, and he'd received a notice. The mood shifted. What at first seemed quixotic now felt like collective pressure at IT was clear. The HOA wasn't just enforcing a mailbox regulation. They were sending a message. The board's authority, the expectations of conformity, the cost of resistance. I scribbled in my notebook, keep the box, resist the fine, rally the residents. I knew this would not be easy. The fines would mount. The board would not back down. But I also sensed something. If I could get others on board, if we could expose the board's overreach, maybe we could shift the balance. I began gathering evidence. Photos of mailboxes across the street, notices sent to me and others, minutes from meetings, and a log of communication attempts. I made sure to keep everything documented. The stakes had grown. It was not simply about a mailbox. It was about power in a neighborhood, about rules versus homeowners, about the silent contract we sign when buying a home in an HOAS. The cold autumn wind swept through the cul-de-sac. I stood at the end of my driveway, looking at my forest green mailbox, bracketed by two identical narrow homes and uniform sidewalks. The mailbox glowed under the streetlight at dusk. It felt like a beacon of quiet defiance. I resolved. I would not be the only one footing this fine. I would not let this one stand silently. The next HOA meeting? I would attend. I would make this visible. My neighbors were watching, quietly curious. The board would know this was not just a single homeowner. The block was responding, and in that moment, I felt the first flicker of something bigger. A neighborhood uprising over something as small as a mailbox. Asterisk, asterisk, end of chapter 1. Asterisk, asterisk, when you're ready, say next, and I'll dive into chapter 2. 1. https://georgeweigelnet/and-readlings-and-500-source=chatgpt.com. HOAs and the $500 mailbox case. Garden house calls. The atmosphere on the cul-de-sac shifted quietly at first, then unmistakably, as curiosity grew and murmurs moved from hedges to front porches. I began receiving more than just my own violation notices. One neighbor had a nearly identical orange sticker on her mailbox just days later. Another had a thinly typed letter stipulating removal of her box within 30 days, or the block mailing capability would be suspended. The neighborhood chatter began to swell. The mailbox rule wasn't isolated, it was systematic. What began with my forest green mailbox had evolved into a neighborhood issue that I called an informal gathering at my home one evening. A handful of neighbors showed up, each with their own story. Fines piling up, rules changing overnight, vague citations. One neighbor used the exact words, "They changed the rule and didn't tell us." Another said she removed a flowering shrub and nearly replaced her lawn after a similar fine, yet still got hit with another violation the week after. They all looked at me when I said I had documentation. I showed them the notice, the June 15th adoption of standardized mail receptacles in the board minutes, the scanned copies of letters, the photos of everyone's mailbox, myself included, still in good condition. The heads nodded in agreement. They saw their story and mine as I sifted through the HOA board's minutes and annual reports. I saw threads of consistency, talk of community aesthetic, uniformity of mailboxes, entrance standards. There was even the case of a nearby community where a homeowner fought a $500 mailbox requirement for 7 years and ultimately won. George Weigel, carried by the undercurrent of our own situation, it felt like proof that the rights of homeowners and the backing of the community could matter. I arranged to attend the next quarter board meeting. I sent a formal request to be placed on the agenda, indicated I would represent not just myself but several affected homeowners, and circulated a 1-page summary of our concerns. The board accepted my request, likely because the meeting notice went to all residents. The day arrived. I arrived early, camera in hand, not for sensational video but for clarity. There were board members, the property management company reps, and a handful of residents, some allied to us, some supportive of the board. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the microphone in the large open-seating community room. I presented the case. The notice I had received, the reference to the approved model, the absence of meaningful homeowner feedback, the escalating fines, the lack of transparency. I shared evidence of other residents similarly affected. I pointed to minutes that showed the rule adoption, but no indication of notification to homeowners, no survey, no alternative suggestions, no willingness to grandfather existing mailboxes. I emphasized the sentiment. This was not a minor aesthetic enhancement, it was a disciplinary tool. The room was silent. Some board members squirmed. After a moment, the HOA president acknowledged the discussion but offered a brief defense. Yes, the board adopted standard mailboxes. Yes, homeowners were expected to comply. Yes, fines were authorized under the rules. But she also said the board was open to reasonable exceptions and that homeowners could apply for a waiver through the architectural review process. That felt like a softening, but still not definitive. What changed next was subtle but seismic. I asked 2 simple questions. How many homeowners were informed individually of the rule change? And what is the fee total from uncollected fines on mailbox violations? Neither question was answered with specifics. The board representative shifted topics. The management company rep volunteered a vague statement about operational costs and uniformity. At that moment I knew I held one of the strongest weapons in disputes like this: transparency. Leaving that meeting, I circulated a neighborhood email summarizing what had occurred. I invited any resident who had received a notice or fine to join a shared spreadsheet tracking names, addresses, optional, dates, violation notices, fine amounts. Over the next week, the spreadsheet began to fill. 6 households. For mailboxes cited, fines ranging from $150 to over $400. Total due amounts creeping into the thousands. The weight of numbers shifted the story from my single mailbox to a neighborhood pattern. The next strategic move was aligning the narrative. I contacted the local community Facebook group and posted the key facts, but carefully without naming individuals. I titled it Mailbox Rule and Your Rights. Maplewood Ridge HOA Update provided a short explanation of the situation and linked to publicly available articles of similar HOA mailbox fights. One commenter posted, "We were just told last week to replace ours." Another wrote, "Thought it was only old mailboxes. They targeted us too." The momentum grew. Then I discovered something the board didn't publicize. The contractor for the approved model mailbox was the same company recommended by the board in the architectural packet. A quick search revealed that the contractor's mailboxes cost hundreds of dollars more than generic models, rendering the approved standard into revenue for someone. I filed a public record request and found the invoice schedule. That line of inquiry galvanized some neighbors who were already disgruntled over recent fine notices. Suddenly, my green mailbox was no longer the issue. It became a symbol of community fairness. Armed with this, I proposed a motion. Let all existing mailboxes remain compliant if they were undamaged and functioning. Assess fines only for boxes that pose safety risks or were visibly deteriorated, and only require replacement upon sale or major damage. I explained the logic. It's fairer, less punitive, aligns with best practices outlined in HOA dispute advice. AHA, several neighbors agreed to attend the next board meeting with me, and we decided to distribute printed flyers on the block announcing, Your mailbox might be next. Join us. The flyer invited people to bring their notices, share their stories. On the day of the meeting, our side arrived strong. Additional residents, some local press. I arranged for a local community blogger to attend, and more board members than expected looked over their shoulders as we entered. The board opened with their usual agenda items. When they reached our architectural standards review section, I steered the presentation straight to our motion. The board president looked surprised but allowed us to present. We laid out our research, we displayed the spreadsheet of violations, the list of affected households, the cost estimates, and the contract details of the approved mailboxes. The tension was palpable. The board listened, more attentively than in our first meeting. What happened next changed the dynamics entirely. One of the board members, someone new, younger, stood up and said he disagreed with how the process was handled. He said he joined the board because he believed in fair governance and transparency, and he did not support the idea that homeowners should be fined simply because their box matched one of the neighbors from 10 years ago. His dissent opened a door. The board paused the agenda and asked management to include our motion on the next ballot vote to all homeowners. That night, the mood on the block shifted from, "I just got fined," to, "We might have leverage." As we walked out into the dusk, the forest green mailbox at the end of my driveway felt less like a lone stand-in and more like a flag planted in a field of broader territory. The block was roused. Fines might still mount, rules might still change, but for the first time the homeowners had voice, and they were preparing to vote. The weeks that followed the board meeting felt electric. Rumors swept across the cul-de-sac and even into adjacent streets. Homeowners were talking. They were no longer treating the mailbox notices as isolated irritations. They were treating them as symptoms of a deeper problem. I watched it unfold. When I walked past the end of my driveway where the forest green mailbox still stood, it no longer felt like a lone stand of defiance. It felt like a rallying point. Behind the scenes, the motion we proposed had taken on a life of its own. That younger board member who had voiced his disagreement quietly became something of a co-conspirator. At one of the informal gatherings on a neighbor's patio, I overheard him say that the board's management firm had been billing for new mailbox replacements far more than anyone realized. I realized the equation. Rule followed by replacement followed by fine. An ecosystem. The numbers from our spreadsheet had begun to feed into that narrative, giving it weight. 6 households, 8 notices, fines creeping into 5 digits. That changed how people perceived the HOA board's motives. With momentum on our side, we prepared for the next step, a full community vote. The board, under pressure, agreed to send an amendment ballot to all homeowners. Approve the revised mailbox standard motion, essentially grandfather existing mailboxes, only require replacement upon damage or sale, or keep the current enforcement regime. Flyers were distributed, posts were made in the neighborhood Facebook group, and I coordinated with neighbors to attend the upcoming annual meeting en masse, earlier than usual, with the express purpose of turning the tide publicly. The night of the annual meeting arrived and turned out to be a scene that felt more like a community theater production than a typical HOA meeting. The room was filled. Board members, management company reps, homeowners with notebooks and cameras, the local blogger who had been tipped and arrived with her notepad in hand. The atmosphere had shifted. Homeowners wore calm but determined expressions. The board looked composed but cautious. The first part of the meeting proceeded in familiar fashion. Reading of minutes, financial reports, upcoming maintenance items. Then it came to the item we had all been waiting for, the mailbox amendment vote. The board president introduced it, invited the proponent, me, to summarize the motion, and then opened the floor for questions. I gave a succinct presentation. Homeowners had been fined for mailboxes that were neither unsafe nor unsightly. The process had lacked transparency. The approved model vendor seemed tied to the board, and community fairness demanded a more equitable standard. The room stayed quiet except for a soft hum of shuffling papers and exchanged glances. Then the testimonies began. One by one, neighbors stood to share their stories. The retiree whose fixed-income household had paid $300 for a compliant mailbox only to have the board change the standard again. The young family who felt targeted after complaining about the board's contractor. The couple who simply changed the box color as required but were then told they still needed to install the model to avoid fines. As each story emerged, the mood shifted. It was no longer about a mailbox, it was about perceived fairness, governance, trust, equality. When it came time to vote, the management company distributed ballots and collected them. In a moment of suspense, the board president paused as the votes were counted. Finally, she looked up and announced that the amendment had passed by a significant majority. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. The rules would change. Existing mailboxes would be grandfathered. The fines would be suspended for those in compliance with functioning units, and a future standard would include homeowner input. Applause followed, homeowners smiled. The board tucked away their expressions and offered a statement. "We hear you," the president said, briefly acknowledging the process. After the meeting, I walked back to my house, pausing by the mailbox. The street lights cast long shadows across the driveway. Neighbors were standing in small groups, chatting quietly and smiling. A sense of relief mingled with empowerment. For once, the homeowners had not just grumbled, they had acted and changed the rules. The board had seen that the balance of power could shift. But the victory came with new responsibilities. The board now needed to act on their promised transparency, distribute an updated standard, publish the contractor bids, open the next architectural process for feedback, and issue a formal apology to those who had been fined. The younger board member approached me quietly and said that the management firm had already initiated a review of their vendor relationships and had stopped issuing new mailbox violation notices until the process concluded. That underscored the broader shift. A once quiet street dealing with what seemed like small details had learned the muscle of collective action. Over the next few days, the fines were reversed for those who had appealed and had compliant mailboxes. Homeowners who had paid improper fines were given options for credit or refund. The old mailbox notices disappeared, replaced by newsletters explaining the updated policy, the vote results, and the path forward. The effectiveness of our spreadsheet, our flyer distribution, our meeting attendance, it all added up. It reinforced that even in a system dominated by rules and enforcement, transparency, data, and neighbor solidarity mattered. At the end of that week, I stood once more at the curb, the forest green mailbox gleaming in the dusk. I hadn't changed its color or model. It remained the same post I'd installed years ago, but it had ceased to feel like a flashing sign of rebellion. It had become a symbol of what the block had achieved. The cul-de-sac was quieter now when it came to that particular conflict. Neighbors waved as I walked by. The board's tone at the next meeting was noticeably different. In the months that followed, conversations on the block shifted. Neighbors were more likely to ask, "Have you received any violation letters lately?" Or, "Did you see the management report?" Rather than avoiding the subject altogether. There was a new sense of openness. The mailbox fight had broken the ice. While there were still debates about parking and fences and holiday lights, of course, the mailbox issue had served as a catalyst. If the homeowners could succeed here, they could hold their board accountable in other areas too. In the end, what began as a simple violation notice and an orange sticker slapped on a mailbox evolved into something far broader. A community discovered that their voices mattered, that board decisions were not automatic, that a rule without transparency could be challenged. The green mailbox still stood. It didn't look different. What changed was everything around it. And so, as the sun set over Maplewood Ridge and the hush of evening settled across the street, the mailbox at the end of my driveway stood in quiet triumph. Not because of its color or model, but because of the block's resolve.